Hello and good evening, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Fireside Chat series. My name is Fred Kodecheme, and I'll be your host. As you all know, COVID-19 has been one of the most persistent and imminent threat to our lives the past 12 months. It is literally the pandemic of our times, and we have to educate ourselves relentlessly to avoid getting this disease and infecting others. Today, we are very fortunate to be joined by Dr. Collins A Kwarteng, a medical expert who understands this disease very well, not only through his work treating patients, but one who has recently suffered from the coronavirus himself. And in fact, he is still recovering at this very moment from COVID. Dr. Kwarteng, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Fred.
Good. Dr. Kwarteng is a board-certified internal medicine, echocardiography, nuclear cardiology, adult cardiovascular diseases, and interventional and structural cardiology. He is the owner of and CEO of the City of Hope Heart and Vascular Center in Dublin, Georgia. Doctor, again, welcome to the Fireside Chat series, and thank you for agreeing to share your diverse experiences with us.
Thank you for having me.
You are most welcome. First of all, I want to thank you for the work that you do as a first responder. And, you know, we very much appreciate you and all first responders for all the work that you are doing the last 12 months or so. I mean, without the work that you all do, we will know where we will be today. So thank you. And I must also say that we all believe in science and we'll continue to believe in science because what is really helping us at this point. So again, thank you and welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Can you tell us something about yourself and your chosen profession as a cardiologist?
Wow. That is $1 million question, Fred. I don't know even know where to begin. Very briefly, I was born one of 15 children to my dad and one of 3 to my mother. Most of my life, I was raised in the Brown-Hafun region of Ghana. And I did my common entrance in the Brown-Hafun region, came to TI Media Secondary School in Kumasi, O-level from Form 1 to Form 5. Then I transitioned to Accra, West Africa Secondary School, WAS. From there, I did my national service back in the Brown-Hafun region as a science teacher, and then was admitted to the University of Ghana as an arts student, actually. I didn't do my medicine in Ghana. All of that happened when I got to the United States. So at Legon, believe it or not, with no sort of role models to lead me to get, you know how it is in Ghana. You know, you have to have a big man lead you to the administration.
Exactly.
Yeah, to get, quote unquote, the best courses. So I was actually given Greek literature, Greek history, philosophy, and geography in the 92-93 year as a first year FUE. And then, as luck will have it, there was the Aluta in the 94-95 season, where I think former President Rawlings was in charge then. At that time, there were some issues with university faculty, and so they went on strike, and then we went in their support. I was a resident at the almighty Commonwealth of Vandal City, University of Ghana. And so in 95, and then I was actually voted president of ISEC, which is an international student interested in economics and commerce, as a first year student, as the president of ISEC. So through that avenue, I had the opportunity actually to travel to Copenhagen to the 1995 Social Summit, UN Social Summit in Copenhagen. And through that is actually where I met, at that time, former President Rawlings's cabinet. He had a little press conference, and I had an interaction with the team. Now, as you will recall, the Second World War ended right about 1945. So 1995 would have been the 50th anniversary of the United Nations, and the celebration was going on in San Francisco at that time. Now, my mother had been living here in the United States, and so on my interaction with the ministerial sort of crew, the interaction kind of went well. So when I came back to the States, whilst we still had the Luther in full force, I decided that I was going to travel to the States.
Okay.
And they helped me secure a student's visa. But as luck will have it, when I got to the States, my mother, who had been living here, put in one application for the diversity visa lottery. And I won it. So whilst I was here as a visiting student, I won a green card. And so I did an adjustment of status to change my immigration status to a visitor, from a visitor to a green card holder. And that is where everything began. So I had always wanted to be a physician, but because we didn't have that financial support, I was sort of relegated to what I could get. But when I came to the States, my mother sat me down, I think I was 24 at that time, and said, look, young man, in this country, you make your future. Okay, the opportunities are endless. And I had a cousin living in Queens, in Left Rock City at that time, who was a pre-med student going to St. John's University. And so we hung out together. Dr. Ban now lives in Long Island. So,
yeah. Well, okay.
Oh, you know who he is?
Yes. Yeah, I know his family here in Connecticut.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, was our elder brother.
Yeah,
exactly. So we hung out together, and we sort of made a pact that we were going to do medicine. I mean, he was already doing pre-med. Yeah. But see how they say, you show me your friends and I'll tell you your character. So it was a good synergy there. And as I saw him, we all got our first jobs together at CS on Queens Boulevard in New York. Wow. I was selling computers. I think he was in apparel. So we would go to school and come back. But then, I don't have a trust fund. So all the money that I was able to save actually dried out. And so one morning, and I was going to Queens College at that time, I was going to community college. And so I went to school, and they literally drove me out of class for non-payment of tuition. So whilst I was on the subway, and if you know New York City, Queens, you take the subway from Flushing back this way to see it. And I was quite upset and disappointed, actually. But on that train was a U.S. Army recruiter.
Yes, yeah. I'm glad you went into that.
Yes, exactly. Who saw an opportunity of a young man whose life he thought he could change. So this recruiter pestered me as to why I looked so upset. And I told him I wanted to be a doctor, but I just got, driven out of class for non-payment of tuition. And so he started pitching the army to me. How about going to the military? And I looked the guy in the face and I'm like, dude, are you deaf or dumb? Which one is it? I just told you I want to be a doctor and you're pitching the U.S. Army to me. And then the guy said, hear me out. You seem like a pretty smart guy. So how about this? You go to Fort Hamilton with me in Brooklyn. I'll put an ASVAB in front of you. And if you ace it, then I think I can hook you up to be an Army medic. And I'm looking at him, I'm like, this guy still doesn't get it. And then he made an argument that, look, are you married? I'm like, at that time, I'm getting ready to be married, but I do have dependents. And he's like, well, if you have dependents and you join the military, whilst you are away, the Army will take care of your dependents. They will feed you 3 times a day. They will clothe you. All right. And then you go to school and the Army will pay 75% of it. And, all of a sudden, my facial expression changed. I'm like, okay, Now we're talking. So needless to say that the conversation carried on. The next thing I knew, I was down in Brooklyn for Hamilton. He handed me a booklet. 45 minutes later, I was done. I handed it to him and he's like, did you change your mind again? I'm like, no, I'm done. So he takes the thing and they have the Scantron. So he put the Scantron on the thing. He's like, yeah, I think you can become a medic. So without my mother's involvement or consultation, I signed up to join the United States Army as an Army medic because I was so determined to become a physician that it didn't matter what sort of obstacles I had to jump over, I was going to do that. And so I signed up for the United States Army, and then the rest, they say, is history.
Wow. Doc, so yours is really the story of a quintessential model immigrant. You know, you came all the way from Ghana, and now even having your paper regularized at the time, you won the DV lottery, and here you are today. Not only that, you joined the military, served this country, and now you're a doctor, serving in the front lines, doing all these amazing things, you know, as a cardiologist. And, you know, knowing that, you know, a little bit about you, I know how impactful you are in, you know, in every sphere of your life. So we really appreciate you, and we hope everybody's listening when we talk about immigrants and what we contribute to the United States. And, you know, here's the story. So it's a very powerful one, you know, very powerful one indeed. So thank you.
Thank you. You are welcome. You are welcome.
Doc, how did you receive the news that you tested positive for COVID?
So we had a patient who was having chest pain that we brought in for a stress test. You know, we screened her, no symptoms. She came in for the stress test. And while she was doing the stress test, her mask kept falling. And of course, she's on the stress test, so she's breathing heavily. Her EKGs on her chest was not stable. So I called more or less my nurses, because it was a female patient. You know, I didn't want to be in the room feeling on her chest and stuff like that, trying to get her EKG straight. So I brought my nurses with me to help stabilize the EKGs. And so we were in that close proximity. We were all wearing our masks. Okay. But after that interaction, it wasn't immediate, but a day or so later, I started having this sort of runny nose and a scratchy throat. You know, that evening we were setting up to do an office clean. You know, we had a private contractor scheduled to come in. So I was lifting charts off the floor, put it on higher ground so that when they come in, they can do the steaming and the vacuuming of the carpet. I mean, I think I'm Superman. I can do everything. But then I started.
No, I'm sure you know, you think you are Superman. I've known you for a
while. So I started lifting the boxes, and hardly had I lifted 2 boxes when I started getting really dyspneic, like short of breath. And then I saw sweat started beading on my. So my nurses are like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "I think so," you know. And so I was fixing to go home, and I had put my charts, all my work that I wanted to do at home, at the back of the truck already. But then my throat, then you have this feeling of like, I don't know if you've ever been in like a sauna before, like when you enter a sauna and that heat hits you, it sort of dripped all over my body. I'm like, this is odd. Okay. And no, what the situation was, I said, I'm going to stop by the local medical center and get myself tested. Okay. And then lo and behold, when I went in, I came back positive, and, you know, my shoulders dropped and a whole lot of thoughts starts, you know, running through your head. So that is how I found out. And so then that day, my nurses also started coming back positive, one after the other.
Wow.
Yeah, and so we had to shut down the practice for 3 weeks. Actually, one of my nurses actually had progression of her disease that she needed admission. But being a excuse me, being a tough guy, I decided that I was going to sort of do the best I could and manage. So I was running around the house, walking around the house with my pulse oximetry, checking my vitals, making sure that at any sign of decompensation, I was going to head out. And so that is how the whole thing began.
Okay, thank you really very much for going into that. the initial stage when you discovered that you had indeed been infected. Viewers, if you are joining us, we are joined live by Dr. Collins A Kwarteng. He's the CEO of the City of Hope and Vascular Center in Dublin, Georgia, and he's also recently recovering from COVID-19. And he's here to basically share his experience with COVID with us. And, he's a doctor, he's treated many patients, but now he's dealing with the disease, or he's dealt with the disease. He's at the tail end of it. But as you can see, he is still having some lingering issues with this disease that never seems to, always go away, depending on, on your situation. So thank you again for joining us. If you have any comments, please feel free to type it in the comment box, and we will go through it as we go ahead with the program. And before we continue, Doc, you did a YouTube video. You were basically trying to tell us what was happening with you during, in the beginning of the COVID transmission. This YouTube video went viral, and for those who didn't get the chance to see, I want to show this video briefly, and then we'll go into it. Hopefully you can talk about what was happening at the time. So please bear with us. Let me find this video.
Disclaimer: this is not the end all be all, and what might have helped me may not help you, because I'm not coming to the game with the same set of circumstances as you are. But I'm only sharing my experiences with you to let you know that it helps. And by getting the steam down to your passages lower deep down, you are able to add the moisture there. When the vapor gets down into your lower airways, it condenses and then adds the moisture you need to help moisturize or loosen up the phlegm. Now, you are not going to see the benefit right away after you do the steam therapy. It takes time, 20-30 minutes, sometimes an hour after your treatment. But the most important thing is that you are getting more moisture down into your airways where ordinarily you wouldn't have. And I know this because on day one, I felt the mucus in my chest, but I still could not bring it out. And the more I tried to clear my throat, the more I tried to bring it out, my chest started hurting, to the extent that I had to avoid doing that to avoid the chest pain. But after I started the steam therapy, it made it easier. The benefit of the grounded ginger and all of that is to create that aroma and irritant, which when that irritation hits your nasal passages and your lower airways, it helps to induce that cough reflex, and then that coughing then helps to bring up. And I'm telling you, when that mucus eventually comes out, it's rusty colored, and if you feel it, it feels like Gorilla Glue. So imagine all of that thick glue-like mucus sitting there in your airways with no way to come out. And then you can start to understand why people go into respiratory distress if they don't manage it well.
Wow. Doc, that's a very powerful video, and we are very glad that you took the time, albeit the pain and the things that you were going through, to capture that moment and share that with us so we can also learn something from it. Many people have commented on that video, and it's a very powerful video. For anyone who has doubts still, I'll be very surprised, but we hear of stories of such people who have doubts about this disease and the level, and at one point you described it as an evil disease, that it really takes over your body, so I'm going to ask you in a few seconds, why you did that video. But before I do that, I just want to recognize some of our audience members. We have Emmanuel Minta, I believe, joining us from Ghana. We have Pius Ali, Kasama Ali, thank you for joining us. Heti Bechi, Cyril Adiepena, Patrick Mensah is joining us, I believe, from London. Abdul Samad Walker has joined us. We have Ebenezer Nketia and Abigail Berema, who is a registered nurse herself. We have someone from Spain, Rosario Vego from Spain, all the way. So thank you, Rosario, for joining us. Gifty Siao and Clement Oben, thank you for joining us. Abdul Samid Walker, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate you all joining us. Doc, why did you decide to do this video to share your story with the world?
Well, a couple of things. I had a very unpleasant experience last March, where I had spoken to a gentleman who had just had the COVID. And what I thought the interaction sort of got out, and he wasn't happy. And so after that interaction, I sat back and I started thinking, this is a disease process that people don't know about. How helpful will it be if somebody who experiences it can actually go out and share their experience so that people will understand that this is no joke? And so I've been diligent at the office personally. So when I got it, the first week was quite challenging. My only focus was survival. I mean, I lay in bed, hardly able to move. My bathroom is right there, but I'm unable to get up and go. When you wake up in the morning, you feel frozen. I've never had menstrual cramps before, but I'm married and I have siblings who are females, and they talk about how it feels. And you feel frozen, like your lower back, in your pelvic area, your thighs, your calves, your neck is stiff. You can't even turn your neck. That is the musculoskeletal components of it. And then you have to deal with a respiratory component where you can hardly breathe. And so, excuse me. And so the first week was geared towards survival, trying to survive. And so as I went aggressively at it, and the reason I knew what I knew about COVID was because my colleagues sort of chose me to lead a writing group to write a white paper on the novel coronavirus. So myself and about 6 additional distinguished physicians, all US-based, went ahead and wrote a white paper, which was shared with some of them.
I don't mean to interrupt. This was in the beginning when the virus started. I remember reading that.
Yeah, that's correct. And so we did a literature dive. And so now I'm not an infectious disease doctor. So for some people, for those who think, okay, why does a cardiologist feel inclined to talk about coronavirus? I'm not an infectious disease guy. I do treat patients in the hospital when they come in with COVID, and I get consulted for the cardiovascular component. So I'm equally on the front lines. I'm going into the ICU, donning up and checking on patients who are on vents and stuff like that. So I'm right there. But that is not my specialty. However, by virtue of that sort of project, writing project, we dug very, very deep into the origins of this version of the coronavirus. We reviewed a lot of articles, and those times last spring, March, April, I mean, people were spitting out articles left and right, and it was like, you know, dizzying. You know, you read one thing, the next thing you know, another one is coming out. So we had the opportunity to dive deeper into the coronavirus, what it was, and it turns out that coronavirus as a microorganism or as an infectious entity is not new. It's been with us, okay? But the corona part of it okay, sort of originated in the early 1960s, where electron microscope had been discovered. And for the first time, scientists could actually look at particulate matter, okay, at the level of a virus, for example. So when they saw this particular virus under the electron microscope, which is able to blow it up so that you can see the fine details, this particular virus looked odd. It looked like a tennis ball with spikes on it. And at that time, NASA, with space exploration, had taken a picture of the sun and all of like the heat waves on the sun. And when they looked at a picture of the coronavirus under a microscope and they looked at NASA's picture, it looked so identical. And so the name corona, which is the sun, more or less, I don't know if it's Greek or Latin, was born at that time. And that is how they started identifying and following it as an infectious entity. Now, it causes the regular sort of seasonal flus ordinarily. But the reason and the difference that we never heard about it, the reason we never heard about it was because those forms which were identified in the early stages. Now, let me clarify this. A virus is not an independent living organism. A bacteria is. A bacteria is able to independently reproduce and spread and multiply itself in a conducive environment. A virus does not have that ability. A virus only propagates when it gets a host.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's more or less like a parasite which takes over the native mechanism of a host, and normally that is a particular cell. And to be able to take over that cell's machinery, it requires a receptor. And so those spikes, you've seen all of those pictures that CDC shows and all of that. Those little spikes are the proteins on the outside of the virus that they use to bind the cell.
Okay.
For them to be able to get into a cell, there has to be a receptor. And that receptor must fit that protein like hand and glove or hand in a glove. And once that receptor binds, once that protein binds to the receptor, that is when it gains access. It attaches to the outside of the cell, and then the cell invaginates through a process called endocytosis. So as it takes it into the cell, part of the cell's membrane wraps around the virus, which is attached. And so it's sitting there in a little bubble inside the cell. And it waits until conditions in the cell are just right. Mm. And normally that happens when the conditions turns more acidic. So if the pH within the cell turns more acidic, then the covering that virus then disintegrates. So now all of a sudden the virus is exposed on the inside of that particular cell. And within that cell is the production machinery that the cell uses to replicate its own DNA. See, when you cut yourself, it heals. The reason it heals is that your cells are able to be reproduced in the area and fill in the gap. So cells have the ability to reproduce. And to do that, it sort of needs to go through the DNA machinery and all of that, cell division and all of that. So this virus then takes over the internal machinery of the cell, and then it burns a lot of copies. Just like an undercover copyright person trying to burn people's CDs. It just burns copies after copies after copies after copies. Now, people might not know what an RNA virus is, but I'll keep it simple. Mm-hmm. The difference between an RNA and a DNA is that when we talk about DNA, think of DNA as both strands of the zipper on your shirt. There are two strands. So for every single nucleotide on one side, there is an opposite corresponding nucleotide. That is what the DNA is. It's a double helix. That is a DNA material that determines our eye color, our hair, everything. So that is the blueprint of creation. That virus does not have two strands. It's only one strand, an RNA. Now, if you go back and think about how DNA replicates, the machinery which replicates the DNA has built into it ability to make corrections. For every side of a DNA, for every nucleotide on one side, there is supposed to be a corresponding opposite nucleotide. A goes to T and C goes to G. So when it's replicating, and for example, there is a mistake where A is paired up with G, it's able to recognize that and splice out the G and bring in a T and fix that problem. So in situations where there is a failure to recognize that mistake, that is where you have DNA that is where people get congenital issues. Okay. Because the DNA is by itself not a working sort of thing. It forms a blueprint upon which proteins are made. It is the arrangement of the DNA which then becomes a template upon which proteins are made, and proteins are the building blocks that build us. So if you look at a virus only has one strand. So the replication mechanism, when it's burning copies, it makes a mistake and is unable to correct it. That is one thing. That virus comes through me and I get you infected. If you take the same virus that came through me and you really sequence every single position, you will realize that you are not going to get the same identical virus.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because the replication leads to mistakes, and those mistakes will lead to different proteins. Because remember that RNA material becomes a building block, a template upon which proteins are made. And every 3 nucleotides will code for one sort of piece of protein or the building blocks of protein. And so when proteins are made based on the forces of attraction, they bend to a specific configuration. So when a virus makes too many mistakes, and for example, it builds, let's say, a surface protein which looks like that, and your body gets exposed to that, and let's say this is how it attaches. Your body, through the adaptive immune system, may develop an antibody which can come in and fit on like that. Okay? And then it is like the National Reserve, or the National Guard or Reserve. By exposure of this particular protein, you create a memory in your immune system based on this protein. And then your body makes a lot of antibodies based on this protein. However, if that virus replicates and makes a lot of mistakes, that protein, which looks like, what used to look like that, now looks like this, right? Okay. So we were building antibodies expecting to go face a protein which looked like that. Now it looks like that. So now when you bring in your antibody, look what happens. It doesn't bind it well, so it doesn't give you the protection. So it is the replication which leads to the mutation. And it goes to the understanding that we are not going to fight this virus. We are not going to be successful if we don't stop the spread.
Right.
That is why people have to understand it from the very granular level, what we are doing to ourselves when we fail to listen to the authorities. Because if a virus does not replicate, it does not mutate.
Yeah.
And for as long as we go out there and we go to our funerals and we go to our parties and we expect the government to solve all of our problems, we are part of the problem. And until we sit down and we understand what we are doing to continue to contribute to this pandemic, then we are in for. And so, and I know this is a long segue to answering your question, but I wanted to break it down for people to understand.
Very important.
Okay. So when because of that understanding that I had, I figured, well, I'm not out of the woods. I live in an environment where people still doubt. And like I said, I live in Trump country. And so there are still people who still come around after 253,000 people have perished, who still for some reason still doubt that this is real. And the numbers are packed and this is all the left and all of that. That is absolute hogwash. Because if it's real, and I've been there and I've been that close to not making it.
Yeah.
And so I figured that my experience coming from somebody who is actually not just treating patients, but somebody who is actually suffering, that if somebody heard it from me, maybe for the first time, they will start to take this seriously.
Yeah.
And I never thought that this video was going to take a life of its own. But for some reason, it struck a chord with people. And within hours and days of the video coming out, a lot of people have had so much feedback as to how people are confessing to me that, you know what, I thought all of this was a fake until I heard you. And now I'm not going to joke with this anymore. So it was not something that I intended. I was just sharing my experiences with people on the common platforms that I'm on. And of course, it took a life of its own. And so that is how, or that was the reasoning behind me wanting to do the video. I had a little bit of an a priori knowledge by virtue of the white paper we wrote. I have been treating patients. I mean, not directly treating patients, but being consulted to treat COVID patients when in the ICU and on the floor. Because to treat, when you get consulted, you have to go in and you have to review the patient's chart. You have to see what medications the doctors are treating them with. They get an ultrasound and then you review and then you give the recommendations as a specialist on what to do next for the patient. So I've been front and center. And so with my personal experience, I felt it would be of service to share my experience with folks who may still have been sitting on the fence. And they, like I said, if it helps save one life, then it is all worth it.
Thank you. Thank you very much for giving us that background. You took us back to biology class in college. And now I'm trying to remember some of the things that my professor used to say. So thank you. Thank you for breaking that down for some of us. I have so many, a few friends who have contracted COVID over the last few months. And one thing I noticed is that everybody's symptoms are different. One may say, oh, I just have a small headache, a fever, a couple of days after it went away. I have friends who are still, after months of getting it, they still have the lingering coughs, coughing, and, they have all these things going on. So as you explained very well, everybody's symptoms is going to be different because of their type, their background, and everything that, their makeup. So that explains why, at the very best, we should do everything to avoid this disease, prevent it ourselves from getting it, because you don't know what comorbidities you have. You may think you know, but you may not know, and you may have other issues going on underneath that you have no idea about. So your best bet is to stay away from it, take all the precautions you can to avoid getting it. So I want to get into some of the comments that we are getting from our audiences. So please bear with me. We're going to go through a few of them. Abdul Samid Walker said, Doc, I have been feeling feverish lately. My body is not hot and all, but I feel the edge that it is a fever. I took ibuprofen and it went down, and continue to take ibuprofen. Any advice you could share would be helpful.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Walker. So, when you have a fever, in this day and age, when you have an unexplained fever, you have to assume that you've been exposed to COVID. This is the times we live in. When you have fever, or what you describe as that feeling which drains over you, you are not hurt, but you have a fever. Number one, you need to check your temperature. Okay, putting a band-aid on it does not solve the problem. It only makes it go away momentarily, but then it comes right back, and you have done nothing to affect the actual source of the fever. So all you are doing is just putting a band-aid on it. And as a word of advice, Mr. Walker, if you listen to my video, I chose not to use ibuprofen or the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory medications, or the NSAIDs, the Aleve, the Motrin, the ibuprofen. And the reason, as you may have seen on many platforms, is that some of the population cohorts who gets really beat up with COVID, who have a very terrible mortality numbers, are people with kidney disease. When you take ibuprofen, you affect the blood flow going into the kidneys. So your kidneys are not functioning well. That is why people who take lots of ibuprofen can actually have kidney damage. The kidney is front and center in producing vitamin D. The kidney is front and center in making red blood cells. It's an intermediary, sends signals for red blood cells to be made. And remember what we're talking about. COVID eventually leads to significant anemia, white cells, and production and everything is down. So I will not recommend that you use ibuprofen. But Mr. Walker, the best thing you can do for yourself, because by self-treating with the ibuprofen, you are sort of squashing your symptoms. Momentarily, it makes you feel good and you feel like, oh, I can go out and do things. But then when you go out, so suppose you were infected and that is what is causing your symptoms, that is your body's sign, red flag, waving that, hey, there is something going on. But if you suppress it, it makes you feel good. And then you feel like you can go out and interact with folks. And you may, if you have it, I don't know if you do. So I think the right thing to do, number one, is to make sure that you are not infected. Because if you are infected, then the appropriate treatment can be started. I never used any therapy until I confirmed that I was infected. And then I could use, and that would have been justified. Okay, as far as medicine goes, I didn't use anything until I confirmed that, yes, I had a virus, and now this is how I'm going to manage the symptoms and try to get to the bottom of it. So please get yourself tested. And to all our listeners, if you have an unexplained fever in February of 2021, you've got to assume that you have COVID until proven otherwise.
Very well said, Doc. I think that's the that's the explanation that we need to hear. That if you have any doubt, you have a fever, just get tested. At the very least, get tested, and you get your answer. Miss Felicia Archer said, "I'm sorry you had to go through that. I watched your video, very informative. Thank you for the details." Thank you. And Mr. Louis Boatin said, very good explanation. Did you use any herbs or local remedies for treatment? As local remedies referring to Ghanaian remedies that our grandparents have shown us over the years.
obviously I live in Southeast Georgia, so I don't have I don't have the toolkit that we have at home, but that is not to say that I didn't have access to certain things. Now, as I stated before, you know, I mean, I studied Western medicine. When I give an aspirin, I know exactly what aspirin does, how many tablets of aspirin I need to give before it reaches its therapeutic level, and what happens when I pull it off. I know that if I give aspirin and another medication, I know what drug-drug interactions it could cause. Those things have been studied. So I'm not against traditional medicines. The danger, and I've used certain things. I mean, I grounded ginger, and I put ginger in the hot water that I use for my skin therapy. But I wasn't using it as though it was going to cure something.
Mm-hmm.
It was just to give me that irritation when you inhale it, because you can smell that spicy scent and you can taste it in your mouth, in the vapor, and it will help irritate. I don't think, and I may be wrong, I don't have the data to back it up. This thing, I'm a scientist, so everything requires scientific explanation, and I don't think I can support that, not yet. However, I don't think that those quote-unquote herbs specifically targets the virus. I don't think it is virucidal, as in bactericidal, but it helps to relieve the symptoms associated with the infection. As a matter of fact, if you bring two people and you give somebody an aspirin and you convince the other person that you are giving them an aspirin when it's actually a sugar pill, the person that you gave the sugar pill will come back and tell you that I feel good. That is the power of placebo. If you think something is going to help you, more than likely, that is what your response is going to be. So to answer that question, I used that ginger, garlic, but it was not for the purposes of thinking. As I took the vitamin C's and the vitamin D's, I knew what those things were going to do. When I took the Tylenol, I knew the Tylenol was going to specifically, break my fever and relieve me of the muscle aches. Okay, now, as I went through the second wave, and so for those of you who watched the second video, I thought I was doing well. And then I had a setback. Okay? And so then I went off a tangent and aggressively, went after it. All right. But I did those based on at least the very sort of scant data I had. Because when I had a setback, man, it was not good. And I felt I was literally in a nosedive.
Yeah, I think I have a clip of that video. I'll show that so they can get a little gist of, what you were going through. But the last question before I show that video, Anita said, good evening, doctor. Can you please help me understand what's causing the negative COVID results? A patient presented with all the symptoms of COVID, and even her x-ray showed, but there are times her test came back negative.
Okay, Anita, so it's quite simple, right? A test is sort of planned or structured to identify, and depends on what tests. Now, her question is not specific as to what type of test, but I'll make it very easy to understand, right? So when we test for the virus, there are two tests that at least I know of. When you go in, there's the rapid test, right? And then there's the PCR. So the PCR is a polymerase chain reaction where a virus particle has been used as a template. And remember how I said a DNA particle has its corresponding nucleotide. So using that known sort of set of nucleotides, you can replicate certain things and then you can get the number. So when you test the concentration, it comes back, and that is more reliable because it tests a certain specific segment of a virus. And when those things are replicated, then you know, oh, that virus is there. Mm-hmm. So it's more reliable. Now, that is one part of it. The other part is just the rapid test. And the integrity of a test depends on the sample that you collect. At some point in the beginning of this pandemic, back home, the people who were on the front lines were so afraid, appropriately so, that when you showed up to test, they were so afraid they didn't want to interact with you. So they would pull down a cup and then tell you to spit in it. And then they will use the swab to swab the saliva sample. When you dig, if this, okay, if I spit in there and it's just saliva and I put my dipstick in there, the likelihood that the place that I put my dipstick is going to pick my viral sample is much, much less. Mm. So if I use this swab,
I didn't understand.
So if I use this swab and I put it in my tester, whether it's an antigen, sort of a reagent, it is not going to come back positive. So then you have a false negative test, because from your question, from all indications, the patient has the virus. But the person doing the collection did a disservice by not collecting the appropriate samples. We know the virus lives in the nostrils. So you've got to get in there and swab and get a good sample that has the highest fidelity of coming back. So that is the reason why we get the false negative testing. As a matter of fact, one of my nurses, the Friday that I got tested, she was having headaches. And she called me and said, I'm not coming in, because she's the number one person. She's my number one enforcer. No patient getting through that door if they feel just a little feverish. You are not getting in. And I have sent my staff home 2 weeks. You are not showing your face up here, because the practice cannot afford to go down. Mm-hmm. I sent the staff home because she was out partying in Florida when many, many people. I said, no, your behind is staying home for 2 weeks. Okay. So when she started having symptoms, she called me in the morning and said, I'm coming in. I said, uh-oh, go get tested. She goes to get tested and her test comes back negative, but she has the same symptoms that I have. And then I go get tested and mine comes back positive. So depending on what type of test you have is going to, and also how good the samples collected. Now, when this pandemic started, mostly in Ghana, we were not up to speed.
Right.
So they go collect the samples in this heat in Ghana, and that sample will sit there for close to a week before it gets tested. Meanwhile, that patient was not isolated. So that sample is sitting there. You don't know what the result is. You may not even have collected the right type of sample. The patient is released. They go back to the community. They have a long asymptomatic phase. And guess what happens? They interact with mom. They interact with dad. The children come in. They interact. Then they go to school. They infect the teacher. So that is why this thing is doing what it is doing.
Wow. Yeah.
Rocket science. But the ability for a test to come back positive depends inherently on the type of test you are using, and also how good your samples are.
Okay. Thank you, Doc. Thank you for that explanation. Doc, I need your permission. I want to show a brief video. I think you mentioned that during a phase in your recovery, you thought you were over the hump. Things were getting better, and then all of a sudden, you started feeling really weak again. So you documented that, and this one I don't think is out there, but we, with your permission, I want to show a brief clip of that. So
Yeah, hold on before you do that. If my mother is watching, Mom, this is live. If my family are watching, this is live. So this is me now as we talk, as we speak. That video that he's about to show is not something you've seen before, and it was even hard for me to watch. I documented and memorialized that because I didn't know how my course was going to go. So, Mom, if you're watching, and if my kids and my wife is watching, that is what you're going to see. So just so I can warn you.
Yes.
It's not very flattering at all.
Yes, I have watched the video, and yes, it's not. So viewer discretion is advised here for our audiences and everyone watching. That, as you can see him live, he is doing very well now. Yes, he has some minor aches and coughs here and there, but he's doing very well. So this was recorded, I believe, sometime last week, and he's over that at this point. But he wants us to show this video so we can see some of the things that he was describing and the pains he was going through. So please bear with me.
Fevers for about 3 days. As you do know, a negative test has not been required. I did have a little bit of a setback because I've really not been exerting myself. It's been a challenge walking up and down the hallways, and now what I'm dealing with is very protracted bouts of coughing. I've tried everything, but it's not abating. So I'm going all out against this disease. I refuse to let it take my life, and whatever it takes is what I'm going to do. So as you know, there's a lot of literature coming out now, although very preliminary, about the use of ivermectin.
Okay, well, so to everyone watching, as you can see, Dr. Kwarteng was really suffering at that moment. I mean, there was a lot, and it's very personal, and we are very fortunate that he was able to share that with us, because that's a very personal moment. And as he said, he didn't want his family to see this video, because at the time, if anyone, if it's my father, my uncle, my brother, I will, I'll be very, very scared. So thank you for documenting that, and it drives home the need for all of us to really take this virus very serious and everything we can, double down on the precautions. We have to, not just for ourselves, our family, our friends, and outsiders, people who don't really live within our house. Doc, so I want to segue a little bit into the vaccines, and then hopefully we can kind of begin to conclude from there. There are many doubters, when it comes to the vaccine. People saying all kinds of things, and what I'm hearing is a lot of conspiracy. There are a lot of science backed up with this vaccine that is going around. There's been a lot of studies by doctors. Many doctors, yourself included, have taken the vaccine because we believe that is the best way for us to overcome this disease. But there are still people who say they don't want to take it because they don't trust it. What do you have to say about that?
Well, and I need to make a correction. I have not taken my vaccine yet.
Okay, thank you.
The day I was actually scheduled to get my vaccine, that was the day I tested positive.
Oh.
I had been dragging my feet, not because I didn't believe in the vaccine, because I do. people who I respect, my attendants, people who made me who I am as a physician, I've seen them take the vaccine, my colleagues, my own family, my sister has taken it. So I believe in the vaccine. But the reason I had not taken it at that time was because, see, I run a very tight, very busy practice, and it's being offered in the hospital. So I'm up early before they show up to the vaccine clinic. And then I get bogged down in the clinic. By the time I'm done with clinic, vaccine clinic is closed. So it was like playing hide and seek, and I never had a chance to do it. But when I decided that I was going to do it, coincidentally, was the time that I started having symptoms. And obviously, you don't want to have vaccination when you are actively symptomatic. And so, excuse me, now, let me give you a brief sort of historical perspective about vaccines, and then paint a picture for you why especially the Black community is very afraid of taking vaccines. So in the 1800s, when the smallpox will come in, it will wipe out numbers of populations. But the people who survived it, the next time that pandemic came around, those people were more able to live and survive the next wave of the pandemic. So scientists at that time started thinking, what is it in these people that makes them more able to fight against subsequent infections? And so Jenna, one of the scientists, introduced the cowpox, which is the initial vaccine was made such that they didn't use the whole entire infectious microorganism, but they used a part of it and they introduced it. So what they introduced in your body was not enough to cause you a disease or symptoms, but it created a lot of noise for your body to respond to that exposure so that your body will build antibodies. That is how vaccines were born. In other words, you use a part of the infectious organism and not enough to cause disease in the person, but enough to irritate the body to induce a response by the creation of antibodies, so that the next time you get exposed to that particular infection, you are more prepared to fight it. So that is the whole idea about vaccination.
Thank you very much for driving that point home. Very eloquently, Doc. I really appreciate that. We can say so much, and I know how outspoken you are, or you've been during the past year and everything that we've been going through, and this misinformation by policymakers, people who are supposed to know better and tell us, well, what we should know, how we should protect ourselves. You have an administration saying, well, this thing doesn't exist, it's not real, but at the same time they say, okay, we're going to set up a task force to put out policy, and then we're going to create a task force to produce a vaccine. At the same time, when you go to programs, you go to events, you tell your people not to wear masks. So what sort of double, standard and misinformation are you putting out? And that is what has brought us here, because we still have people in government or who were in government who still go out and fight against the basics. Wear your mask, social distance. They're not doing it. So it has definitely created or extended this recovery period, that was supposed to take place a long time ago. So we are dealing with it. But tomorrow is Super Bowl, Doc. This is my last question for you. And I don't know what advice you have for people who have plans. As we've always known, we Americans enjoy Super Bowl. We all want to be out with our friends and family to enjoy the game, but we're not living in normal times. I, for one, I'm going to be right in my living room by myself and my family, and that's it. My door will be locked. So I hope others will do the same. What advice do you have for all of us for tomorrow?
Well, I think you hit the nail directly on the head. Okay, this goes to everything we've been discussing over the past hour. Now, by virtue of this broadcast, you know how the virus behaves. If knowing all of that, I want to go out there, because the reason why we are in the predicament we are in is what happened. Christmas holiday, Thanksgiving holiday, all of the intervening holidays where Americans said, no, you are not going to trample on my rights. There was a biker gang somewhere in the Midwest. No, this is our civil rights. And then you have a super spreader event. Look at how many people in America are now infected. Wherever you are, any given moment, you can bet your last dollar that 1 out of 4 or 5 people around you has the coronavirus. So if you know that, every single time somebody steps out of that house, I mean, it's okay, you and your family, I mean, you know yourselves. But if somebody steps out, there is always the opportunity to bring it in, you know? And I'm going to use an analogy that is a little off the wall, but I hope your listeners will bear with me. It's like a John, or it's a slang for a man who traffics in prostitution or sleeps with prostitutes. If you go sleep with that prostitute, and that prostitute works at night and has slept with 1,000 people, by virtue of your interaction with that prostitute, you have inadvertently slept with all 1,000 people that that prostitute previously slept with. Does it make sense now?
Very much so.
And you go interact with people, what you are essentially doing is that you are interacting with any and everybody that that person has interacted with. And so if that person has interacted with one person, the likelihood that something exchanges is much less compared to if that person has interacted with 100 people. And you don't have the ability to know that. So the advice I'll have for folks is that, look, we live in the 21st century. Stay home. You have everything live. Order the food, have them deliver it to your home. No contact. But love yourself and love your family enough to want to protect them. What will you do? If a burglar walks through that front door, what are you willing to do as the head of your family to protect your family? You're going to shoot them? Take a baseball bat to their head? What are you going to do? I'm sure as a head of the family, and it doesn't have to be just males, there are women who are heads of their families. You will kick and scratch and do everything to protect your children, to protect your family. Just think about it for a second. Why would you want to invite a killer in your home? We just recently lost a very prominent member of our community, another cardiologist. Worked all his life, very, very hard, built a huge practice. He has touched so many lives. He gets COVID, and it takes him out. Folks, we've seen it. Those of us who are there, we've seen it. It is not a place you want to be. And I've not just seen it, I've lived it. So if all of this still doesn't do it for you, I don't know what else can. So my advice, please, please stay home. It is only when we all do our part. If all of us did just a little bit, then collectively we can do a lot. So please, You know, it sounds like a joke. It sounds like an abstract, but unless you're there, you cannot even begin to imagine how devastating this thing can be. So if you are going to protect your door, your house against an invader, then you should be able to protect your family against a sneaking invasion into your household. So please stay home. Do not intermingle. And as much as you can, try to avoid interacting with people who are not in a sector.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Doc. I really appreciate it. And, you know, it can't be put any better. You've driven the point home. You've shown us your videos. You've walked us through what this is. For those of us who've been so lucky to not have it or have to experience it yet. So thank you. And all we can do is to express our gratitude at this point and pledge that we'll do everything we can to avoid this disease, not just because of us for our sake, but for, you know, to ensure that everybody else that we love is not infected by us or, you know, our miscalculations. So, you know, on behalf of the audience in the Ghanaian American Journal, we'd like to thank you for everything that you've been able to teach us today. We've had a lot of comments. In fact, I couldn't read them. Many were asking if you are a teacher or, you know, you still, you know, professing, because you're able to break things down so well for them to understand. So thank you so much.
I love to teach, and you are welcome, Fred, anytime.
Thank you. Well, viewers, so there you have it. That's Dr. Kwarteng, the CEO of Hope Heart and Vascular Center in Dublin, Georgia. He's a man who speaks his mind. He always has a lot to share. So if you want to reach out to Dr. Kwarteng, you could reach out to me, and I will help you do that. He has a lot to teach. You know, he's a wonderful man. So we are very grateful that he's been able to join us, and we thank you all for joining us and listening. This has actually been our longest broadcast because there's just so much information that we have to learn or that he needs to put out. So thank you for staying with us, and we hope you do your best to stay healthy, not just for this weekend, but for the foregoing months, because we're still in the thick of this. So have a great weekend, everyone, and enjoy your families.
Stay safe,
Okay.
guys. Stay safe.
Thank you so much.
All right, Fred, thanks for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Thank you. We'll be in touch.
Yes, sir. I'll sign off.